Okay, so let's carry on with the topic of babies. This is chapters again 4, 5, and 6. We're about halfway through chapter 6. The last lecture ended, we were talking, the last lecture ended, we were talking about emotions, baby emotions, and baby personalities. So let me, in this lecture, I want to carry on talking about on the topic of temperament. Temperament is another aspect of personality. Remember, we're defining personality as patterns of behaviors and emotions and thinking that are consistent across time. Um, Emotions are considered to be a a state experience. So we have state and trait. Trait are personality aspects that are consistent sort of throughout the course of your life. Emotions are considered states, so they're temporary, right? Temperament is a trait. It's something that is fairly consistent. And for our purposes, we're going to talk about 3 basic temperaments. There are different ways of measuring temperament. There's some classical ways that go back to some ancient and Greek philosophers, and I've linked a page up for you if you're familiar with that one. But we're going to talk about them in terms of baby temperaments, and you have what would be called an easy or a flexible temperament. You have slow to warm up or fearful temperament, and then you have difficult or feisty. Sometimes we think of this as simple as an easy baby or a colicky baby. Easy, flexible, and what defines or what characterizes temperaments are, does the baby have a regular sleep eating cycle? Can they easily transition from one place or one activity or one setting to another activity? Do they sleep well? Do they eat regularly? Or do they wake up all the time and very picky about what they eat and very sensitive to, different caregivers? Slow to warm up is kind of it would be in the middle. So let me just use a personal example of when my son was in preschool. Actually, it wasn't preschool, it had been daycare. So he'd have been about not even 3. So he'd been in this age category. His caregiver told us that he needed a lot of time to transition between activities. He was on the difficult to colicky. You couldn't just easily move his cheese, as they say. Well, come to find out, he's on the autism spectrum, and one of the characteristics about autism spectrum is they don't like change. They don't do well to transition into change. So she was identifying one of those basic characteristics. On the other hand, my daughter, who would certainly be an easy baby, she would try anything, go anywhere. She'd try any foods, and she has her whole life. Like, I never had to really talk her into anything. She was willing to try new things, and you could shake up her routine, her sleep cycle, and it didn't seem to bother her at all. She could sleep anywhere. And now I have another friend whose child would have been more on the slow to warm up. He needed a fairly predictable schedule, or he got really irritable. So so the easier, or the foundation of these is this baby easy to calm, or are they difficult to calm? A lot of times colicky babies will be in that difficult. Well, they are. They're not. A lot of times they are. They're in that difficult category. And what makes it more challenging is the match, this goodness of fit. Goodness of fit refers to what kind of environment, what kind of household structure, what kind of caregivers, what kind of work schedule do the parents have. And if the parents live a predictable, routine life, then it'll be easier for the difficult or the feisty child, right? If the difficult or feisty, if they don't live, maybe they work swing shifts and there's lots of moving around, or there's lots of unpredictability, it'll be a little harder for the feisty child. On the other hand, an easy child could adapt quite well to a family routine or a family life cycle that wasn't predictable. Any parents of autistic kids are well aware that they have to, that in order to make life easier for their child, they have to live a very predictable, a very routine life themselves. Sometimes it means they don't get to eat certain foods, or they don't get to go to certain restaurants, or they have to have a very prescribed lifestyle in order to make it easier for their children, right? And this is what's meant by goodness of fit. Goodness of fit simply means the relationship between a child's temperament and the lifestyle or the caregiving strategy of the parent. So it's very difficult for a difficult child, or it'd be very bad for a difficult child to, say, live with a parent who has addiction issues, who was unreliable and never there. Another important idea down here, and this one speaks to the biology of temperament, suggests that there may be some brain structure, specifically in the limbic system, which again is your emotional center, and that's where the amygdala is. And the amygdala is the fear structure, that some people appear to have a more excitable fear center or a more excitable amygdala, that this temperament may have biological origins, or what's referred to here as inhibition to the unfamiliar. Remember, going back to habituate versus dishabituate. So the idea is that some people's amygdala may be more active, and so when they're confronted with something that's unfamiliar, they may react more or have high reactivity, versus somebody whose amygdala may be more or less sensitive to change, may be less likely to respond. So maybe the idea would be that maybe one of the difference between a feisty child who doesn't adapt well versus an easy child may be their activity of their amygdala. Maybe an easy child's amygdala is just less reactive. It doesn't respond as quickly. And a difficult child's amygdala reacts more, if that makes sense. When we were talking about pruning, speaking of autistic children, when we were talking about synaptic pruning, the podcast that I made reference to suggests that that autistic children may have, the word he uses is abnormal synaptic pruning. So one of the characteristics of autistic kids, as I'm sure some of you know, is that they're really sensitive to sounds and lights and textures, and it's like they can't tune it out. Well, what synaptic pruning does is it fine-tunes those sensory perceptions. So the theory is that these autistic kids simply have more synapses. Their synapses haven't pruned the same way, and that's why all of that input, that's why they literally get more input and processing more input, which makes it overwhelming. There's a digression there. Okay, so another really important part of attachment and personality and emotional expression is supported by Erikson's theory, and that is attachment. So you might have heard about attachment disorder, right? And that's when this doesn't work quite right. So going back to Erikson's theory from chapter 1, and remember, he's the one that talked about these different crises, that the first crisis was trust and mistrust, and then I think it's industry and shame or something like that. We'll talk about more of those. That as we cycle through these stages, we have to experience certain things in order for us to successfully adapt to the next stage of life. So infancy, it's trust versus mistrust. I think I did talk about this. And so what happens in infancy is, this is when a person is completely dependent on other people, absolutely dependent on all of their needs. So an infant, through their expression of crying or expressing needs, the adult caregiver comes and helps them. And they cry, and the adult caregiver comes and helps them. And this happens over and over and over again. And the child learns that if I have a need, I express my need and someone will come. And I can trust that. I can count on that people are good and people will help me. So the virtue is trust. On the other hand, a child cries, a child who doesn't have reliable caregivers, a child cries, no one comes, a child cries, someone comes, a child cries, no one comes. And this is kind of like, I can't really tell, do people help me or can I rely on them? So they developed kind of an insecure trust, right? Maybe they'll cry just to see if someone will come. And this would be, and that's not it. And this would be sort of a not disorganized, but an ambivalent attachment. So sometimes they come, sometimes they don't, but they really don't have a secure sense that they can trust people, that people will always come to you when you need. And then the third category would be like no attachment. And this is when the baby cries, not only does somebody not come, but in the rare instances where someone does come to help them, maybe they hurt them, maybe they make it worse, maybe they in fact learn not to trust at all, like people are bad, they may become avoidant, right, and steer clear of people. Well, the significance of this, right, the significance is fast forward to adulthood, and the securely attached person will willingly bond with others and will willingly trust and will willingly commit to other, not necessarily commit, but people are good and they can trust them. The ambivalent one, the one in the middle, I don't know. They never can really be sure if that person is really reliable. Maybe they'll call them, maybe they'll like play mind games with them just to see, or they'll ask them for something just to see, just gonna test them, right? That's that insecure. And then the last one, they just don't trust people at all. People are bad. Maybe they become serial murderers or something. But that's not really exactly what we're talking about here. So in this case, what we're talking about is a child and how a child responds to, oh, here we go, attachment may be secure. So that we can begin to see these patterns of attachment in children as early as 3 years old by how they respond to new situations, by how they respond to their mother taking them to daycare, right? And this tells us that about the majority of us have secure attachment. The majority of us trust people, and if we are in a need, we will seek people out. The avoidant group, that people or children, the avoidant group, in this case, we're talking about daycare children, that they don't really care if their caregiver leaves because they don't really count on them anyway. They don't rely on them. We have this other form of attachment, what's called ambivalent or resistant. So sometimes people will say that when they take a child to daycare and they put the kid and the child doesn't want to go play, this will be interpreted as, oh, they have attachment, they're securely bonded to their mother. But what the research tells us, in fact, this isn't true. This is not a sign of secure attachment. The securely attached child will eagerly toddle off, right? Because they trust that their mother will come back. It's the insecure attached child that is less willing to be put down and toddle off because their caregiver may never come back, may not come back at all. So they're not going to let them go. Now, the avoidant attachment, they don't really care, right? They're not attached one way or another. But the ambivalent one, the one that's just really pretty confused here, or resistant, these kids, when their parents come home, want to pick them back up at daycare, right? The secure kid, when their parent picks them up at daycare, may say, oh, hi, mom, or run up to them and give them a hug, but then they toddle away because they know their caregiver is going to still be there. The ambivalent one, when their parent returns, is angry. Not only, maybe they'll run up to them, right, and be angry. They're going to be angry when the parent leaves because they don't know if the parent's coming back, and they're going to be angry when the parent comes back. Just again, because they just can't count on them, right? Where it's the secure one, it's a sort of paradoxical. The secure one is the one that's going to toddle away and probably won't care, maybe say hi to you when you get there, but they're certainly not going to run up to you and be all happy to see you because they know that you're there, right? And for them, the parent becomes a the parent becomes a like a safe, like a home base. And so the secure parent, the secure child will check in with the parent and will go play. And the insecure child, and then there's another one. This is the disorganized, this organized form of attachment. And these kids just don't know what to do. They don't have any emotional regulation at all, right? So they'll be angry when their parent leaves. They'll be angry when they're happy. They may they'll be crying. They'll be angry, but yet not being able to let go of their parent when they get back. They don't have any sense of emotional predictability, or responsiveness, emotional management in relationship to their caregiver. So what does this one say? Attachment, it's about being secure, being able to explore. We see that it's through this interaction, it's through the repeated, reliable interaction, turning towards and having your caregiver respond. One's temperament. So this is where it's kind of your temperament, your ability to calm down, your ability to easily respond will influence your attachment style. And not, so think of it like this, and I think this is a quiz question, like explain what's going on here. So you have a child who's difficult to soothe, and the parent, when the child cries, the parent comes to soothe them but can't calm them, and the child cries and the parent comes to calm them and the parent can't, right? Because this child just does not, can't calm themselves down. Well, attachment goes both ways. Attachment is child relying on parent, but it's also parents' willingness to respond to the emotion, because parents become attached to their kids too, right? So it's also the parents' willingness to respond to the child's emotional needs. If a child can't be calmed down, a parent will be more reluctant to even turn towards them, will be more reluctant to respond to their needs, will be more frustrated, right? When the child cries, instead of like with my babies, I'd go wake them up to play with them, right? And if a child is difficult to calm down, that parent is going to avoid interacting with them, avoid waking them, because it's like a moody partner. You don't know what you're going to get, right? So the temperament informs the attachment to the parent. That's what I'm trying to say. And attachment is really important because it predicts long-term relationships, your ability to pair bond with a lifelong partner. Also, your ability to attach with your own children, because attachment seems to run in generations. We attach to our children much like our parents attach to us. But that also goes back to some of the biology of temperament. Then there's a classic experiment called the stranger situation that's been used to measure attachment. And they take these children, they take these toddlers, and they're in a playroom with their mother. I'm trying to pulling this out of my head. They're in the playroom with their mother, and they're just toddling away. And then at some point, a stranger comes into the room and just is there, doesn't say anything. And then they watch the kid. Does the kid go closer to the mother? Because again, if the parent is that anchor, if they're securely attached, they will respond to the anchor of the parent. So they'll go to the parent, everything is safe, and then they'll go back and play, even though there's this spooky stranger in the room. Well, then I think the next level of the experiment is the parent leaves the room and the kid, discovers that the parent's gone. Well, a securely attached parent will react to the fact that their parent's gone. It's a securely attached child will cry if a parent leaves the room, but the key is in when the parent comes back. The securely attached child will be able to calm themselves when the parent returns, right? And then perhaps go off and play again. But the insecurely attached child is the one that when the parent comes back in the room, they are angry. They can't calm themselves down, because again, attachment is about stability and trust and that I might be angry that my mother left, but when she comes back, I get over being angry because my mother comes back. But if I'm never have faith that my mother will come back, I will remain upset even when she comes back. I hope that makes some sense. And I'm going to stop here. In the next lecture, we're getting close to being done here, friends. In the next lecture, I want to talk about another classical experiment with Harlow's monkey.